What happens when a simple mistake at the airport turns into an explosive confrontation with the law? This shocking incident might just make you rethink how we handle conflict, especially when emotions run high. This is the story of an intoxicated father, a denied boarding, and a scene no one expected to unfold. Narration: it was September 17th, 2023, at Orlando Airport. The sun had already begun to set, the terminal bustling with passengers eager to board their flights. Among them was a father and his family, preparing for what should have been a typical flight. However, this was no ordinary journey. An unexpected altercation was about to unfold, one that would push the limits of patience, authority, and human reaction. The father had everything packed: bags, strollers, and kids in tow. He was ready to board the flight, but something was off. A simple misunderstanding soon took a turn, and he was refused boarding. The reason? His behavior. Something didn't sit right with the gate agent. The subtle scent of alcohol lingered in the air, and the father's stumbling walk was hard to ignore. How often do we see a person's mood or actions influencing major decisions? In this moment, the gate agent had to make a judgment call based on what was seen. It wasn't about the father's intent to travel anymore. It became a matter of safety and responsibility. But the father's reaction was about to take things to a whole new level. As the gate agent tried to reason with him, the father's anger flared. His face twisted with frustration, his voice rising. He wasn't hearing it. "I've paid for this flight," he screamed, his words slurring slightly as he protested. The refusal to board, a simple but necessary action, had ignited something in him. He was no longer just a passenger, he was now a person wronged. We've all been there, right? That feeling of injustice, especially when you're not in control. But what happens when that feeling turns into irrational behavior? The father, frustrated with the situation, seemed to lose sight of what was at stake: his safety, the safety of his children, and the well-being of everyone around him. This is where emotional control or lack thereof becomes pivotal in any high-stress situation. Realizing the situation was deteriorating, the gate agent called over a supervisor. They had no choice but to assess the father's condition. His actions weren't just erratic, they were dangerous. The supervisor noticed it immediately: the smell of alcohol. With no other option, they made the decision to cancel his boarding pass and inform the father that he could no longer fly that day. How would you feel if you were in the staff's shoes? The reality is, the agents had a duty to ensure the safety of everyone, including the father. Yet, they were facing the wrath of an upset passenger who refused to accept the decision. At this point, the scenario was no longer about a flight, it was about maintaining control over a situation spiraling out of hand. What happens when an already tense situation turns into a full-blown confrontation? In this section, the father's fury reaches a boiling point, and the airport staff must call in the police to defuse the chaos. But what happens when the law gets involved? The refusal to board didn't just anger the father, it ignited something far more intense. His face flushed red as he began to shout louder, moving dangerously close to the airport staff. "You can't do this to me," he bellowed, his voice carrying through the terminal. His body leaned forward, his fists clenching at his sides. To him, this wasn't just a flight issue anymore. It was a personal attack. At this point, the situation has shifted from frustration to rage. When a person feels trapped, cornered, and humiliated, emotions can override reason. The father's feelings of helplessness have manifested in a display of anger that now risks spiraling out of control. But the question is, how do you handle a situation when the emotions of an individual are running unchecked? Airport security could see things getting out of hand. One of the staff members, a supervisor, discreetly radioed for police assistance. Within moments, an officer arrived, calm, yet firm, assessing the scene as the father continued to shout. His words, slurred from intoxication, were harsh and full of anger, accusing the airport staff of unfair treatment. This is the moment when the emotional tension meets a hard line: the law. The police are trained to defuse situations like these, But it's never easy when someone is already in a heightened state of agitation. The officer's job is not to escalate things, but to restore order. But does intervening with authority make the situation better or worse? The officer tried to reason with the father, but the response was pure defiance. "I don't care about your rules," the father shouted, his words coming out between breaths. The officer took a step back, assessing the situation. A calm voice tried to reach the father, telling him that his actions were dangerous not just to him, but to his children and those around him. At this point, there's no turning back. The refusal to cooperate has sealed the fate of this confrontation. The officer is trying to reason, but the father's fury clouds any chance of rational discussion. It's not just about the airport anymore, it's about control and the refusal to back down. As the tension grew, the officer placed a hand on the father's arm, guiding him toward a quieter corner of the terminal. The father jerked away, his frustration mounting. "You touch me again, and I'll sue," he yelled. The officer, remaining calm, insisted that the father was not under arrest yet, but that he needed to calm down. His daughter, standing nearby, looked on with a mixture of fear and confusion, unsure of what was happening to her father. It's hard not to feel for the officer here. How do you de-escalate a situation where the individual refuses to cooperate? The officer's restraint is admirable, yet there's a line between restraint and putting oneself at risk. And what of the daughter? She's witnessing a version of her father she's likely never seen before. The emotional toll this takes on children in these situations is often overlooked. The moment came when the father's anger subsided just enough to hear the reality of the situation. He was no longer going to board this flight. Not today, not on this airline. His ticket was canceled. His options were clear: either cooperate or face further consequences. With a deep sigh, he seemed to deflate slightly, but his defiance still lingered in his words. This moment is key when a person realizes that their actions have led to a point of no return. The father's anger slowly turns into resignation, but it's not the peaceful surrender we expect. His words may have softened, but the damage had already been done. He lost control of the situation, and now he faces the aftermath. What happens when a confrontation reaches its breaking point? In this section, things take a turn that no one could have predicted. The father's anger, his inability to calm down, and the intervention of the police all culminate in an arrest that will change everything. The father's emotions were a whirlwind. Anger, frustration, and the lingering shame of being denied boarding clouded his judgment completely. As the officer tried to reason with him, the father's response became more erratic. "I didn't do anything wrong," he yelled, his voice shaking with the combination of intoxication and rage. His body jerked back and forth as he fought against the officer's attempts to calm him. This moment underscores the difficulty of managing an emotionally charged situation. When a person is in a heightened state, whether due to intoxication or frustration, rational thinking becomes almost impossible. The officer's calm approach is meant to prevent escalation, but the father's emotional state is already pushing things past the point of control. It became clear that the situation was no longer something that could be managed with words alone. The officer stepped in closer, his voice firm but calm. "Sir, you need to stop. If you continue to resist, you'll be arrested for disorderly conduct." The father's response was quick, his defiance still burning strong. "Go ahead and arrest me. I don't care," he shouted. The officer had to make a quick decision here whether to continue trying to talk to the father or take action. The stakes were high. Any further resistance could lead to a physical confrontation. But the officer remained focused on diffusing the situation with minimal force. It's an incredible balancing act to remain professional when dealing with an uncooperative individual, especially in a public space like an airport. The moment the father refused to comply, the officer moved quickly to place him in handcuffs. But this only fueled the father's fury. "Don't touch me," he screamed, struggling against the officer's grip. His daughter, now in tears, could only watch as her father was restrained. The sounds of shouting echoed through the terminal, But the officer remained calm and steady, even as the father tried to break free. This moment is a powerful reminder of the complexity of human nature under stress. The father, despite realizing the inevitability of the situation, fought back against the authority trying to control him. His actions, fueled by pride and anger, make this moment tragic not just for him, but for his family. His daughter's distress is a testament to how deeply this event will affect her. The father's final attempt to reason, narration. As the handcuffs clicked into place, the father's anger shifted to desperation. "You don't understand," he cried out, still writhing in the officer's grip. "This is my family, my daughter. You can't do this." His voice cracked, filled with a sense of helplessness that matched the agony in his daughter's eyes. This is the raw emotional vulnerability of the situation, the father's realization that he has crossed a line from which there is no return. The struggle between personal pride and love for his family emerges here, as he tries, in vain, to justify his actions. But sometimes, when a person reaches a breaking point, no words can undo the damage done. The officer, undeterred by the father's outbursts, carefully led him towards the exit. He spoke gently, "You're going to be okay." This could have been avoided. The father didn't respond, his body still tense as he was escorted out of the terminal. His daughter, her face wet with tears, stood in the background, silently watching her father's removal. This moment speaks volumes about the power of calmness in the face of chaos. The officer's steady approach is what prevented the situation from escalating into something far worse. But as the father was led away, the emotional toll on his daughter was unmistakable. This moment, the last sight of her father before he was taken away, would stay with her forever. The aftermath of the arrest was felt not only by the father, but by everyone involved. The airport staff, the relief that the situation had been resolved without violence, were shaken by how quickly things had escalated. The father would face charges, but the consequences for his daughter would be long-lasting. She would carry the memory of that moment with her forever. What happens after such an event? The father may have been arrested, but the real consequences lie in the emotional and psychological impact on his family. The image of her father being dragged away by the police will forever be imprinted in his daughter's mind. How do we make sense of this kind of emotional aftermath? The scars may not be visible, but they're deep and long-lasting. What happens when the dust settles and the reality of the situation fully sinks in? In this final section, we witness the aftermath of the father's arrest and reflect on the emotional and psychological toll this entire incident has left on the family. What have they learned, and how will they move forward? The father sat in the back of the police car, handcuffed and silent. His mind raced, filled with regret. But the damage had been done. The realization that his actions had led to this moment was sinking in slowly. He had gone from being a frustrated passenger to a man arrested in front of his children, all because he refused to control his emotions. The question now is, how do you process an event like this? For the father, there's a heavy weight of personal regret, but it's more than that. His pride, anger, and inability to control his emotions have cost him dearly. This moment is a turning point, where the reality of his situation begins to hit him. He is no longer just a father trying to catch a flight. He's someone who will have to face the consequences of his actions. While the father sat in the police car, his daughter remained in the airport terminal, alone with her thoughts. She was in shock, her young mind struggling to process everything that had just happened. The image of her father being led away in handcuffs would stay with her for a long time. In the chaos of the moment, it was impossible to tell how deeply this event would affect her. Children absorb everything they see and hear, and this traumatic event would be no exception. How does a child process witnessing their parent being arrested? This is a life-altering moment for the daughter, one that may lead to confusion, anger, and even a sense of betrayal. The emotional scars left by this incident will take time to heal, and they may shape her views on authority, trust, and family. The officer, after the arrest was made, took a moment to reflect on the situation. His job was to uphold the law, but this incident felt different. It wasn't just about enforcing the rules. It was about understanding the human side of things. The officer couldn't help but wonder if things could have been handled differently. Could there have been a way to avoid the escalation? This moment gives us a glimpse into the officer's humanity. Despite being trained to handle such situations with professional detachment, he too is impacted by the emotional gravity of the scene. The officer's reflection speaks to the complexity of law enforcement in moments of crisis. Sometimes the emotional toll is felt not just by the individuals involved, but by the ones trying to restore order. Later that day, the family was left to pick up the pieces. The father's arrest was not just a legal issue, it was a personal one, affecting everyone involved. The wife, now at home with the children, tried to make sense of the situation. Her thoughts were a mixture of concern for her husband and worry about the long-term effects this incident would have on their family. The wife's perspective is crucial here. She is left to navigate the emotional aftermath, trying to explain what happened to their children, while also dealing with her own confusion and hurt. This is the hidden cost of such incidents, the emotional labor required to pick up the pieces after everything falls apart. The family's healing will be a long and complex journey. As the day went on, the father sat in a holding cell, his mind spinning. He had no one to blame but himself. The father could now see the full extent of the damage caused by his actions. His pride, his anger, his refusal to listen to reason, these had all led him to this point. He had not just ruined his chance to board a plane, he had jeopardized his relationship with his family, especially his daughter. This is a painful moment of self-realization. When we act impulsively, we rarely stop to consider the long-term effects of our actions. The father's regret is palpable, but it also presents an opportunity for growth. If he learns from this moment, he might be able to rebuild his relationships and find ways to manage his emotions better in the future. The next few days were filled with uncertainty. The father's arrest would have legal consequences, but the real consequences were emotional. His family would need to rebuild, piece by piece. The father would have to face the repercussions of his actions, but the real work would be done on the emotional front. Could they heal from this? Could the father regain his daughter's trust? Only time would tell. Healing from an incident like this is not easy. It's not just about paying the legal price, it's about rebuilding trust and understanding in relationships that were torn apart. The journey to healing will be long, and it starts with reflection and accountability. This experience will be a defining moment for the family, but whether it will break them or bring them closer together depends on how they move forward.